This is episode 324 of Mito Life Radio. I am Matt Blackburn. Today, I'm doing a solo show about calcification. So back in 2019, I developed a protocol called the CLF protocol, and that stands for calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. A lot of the health influencers on social media have only been into this for about 5, maybe 6 or 7 years. I've been into this for 15 years, and I know there's people that have been into it for way longer than that. But I had an interesting journey that started in the year 2010 because I went really hard on research every single day, no matter how many hours I was working 3 jobs or finishing my college degree. I always kept researching and, even more importantly, experimenting. So not just reading tons of books, going to tons of health conferences, but also just connecting the dots in a really unique way that I didn't see other people doing. So I started off with raw veganism and went really deep down that path of lymphatic drainage, cellular detoxification, and calcification was something that came up frequently in the raw vegan community. I remember watching a lecture on YouTube by a prominent raw vegan on stage talking all about calcification. And I think it was a 40-minute clip. And his solution was raw chocolate, raw cacao, to decalcify the body, which, looking back, is hilarious because it's not just a magnesium story, as I'll get into when I get into the solutions piece later, but there's multiple nutrients involved. There's parathyroid hormone, there's 25-OH vitamin D, there's vitamin K2, and even vitamin E protects against calcification. That's been shown in clinical studies, which is not very well known. But let's start with defining calcification. So as the term implies, it involves the mineral called calcium. And contrary to a book in my bookshelf called Death by Calcium by Thomas Levy, which is a huge proponent of magnesium and vitamin C, he actually demonizes dairy as well as calcium supplements. And I am actually open-minded on calcium supplements, and I definitely do not demonize dairy. If someone was coming out of a fruitarian diet or an extreme diet like raw veganism, then perhaps supplementing calcium on top of eating copious amounts of dairy with the nutrients I mentioned earlier is a great strategy to come back from the brink of death. Turns out that calcium is an essential nutrient. It's about 2% of our body weight. Almost 100% of it is in the bones and the teeth. And the reason why you see a lot of deterioration in the vegan community in their dentition, in their mouth, is because of an imbalance caused by a deficiency in pretty much every nutrient, but namely magnesium, calcium, and vitamin K2. But there's many others that they are deficient in. And I speak from experience because my first dental injury was when I was raw vegan and I held up a Myron glass bottle very gently to my front teeth to take a sip and put a little too much force into it and chipped one of my front teeth very easily. And that is because I was severely deficient in certain nutrients because I was on an extreme diet called raw veganism and I was not supplementing the right supplements. So back then, when I consumed no dairy for several years, because that is a demonized food in the vegan community, I created a pretty severe calcium deficiency. And when you hear the word calcification, people can get this idea that calcium's bad, like Thomas Levy wrote about, where that's not the case. Calcification is not simply caused by consuming too much calcium. It's caused by an imbalance in nutrients. So even though 99% is in the bones and teeth, the 1% is really important. And if that goes down, your body will actually pull from that storage in the 99%. And that's how somebody can become calcium deficient over time and contribute to calcification if somebody is not consuming calcium in their diet. For example, if they're not eating dairy. So calcium in the blood is in 3 different forms. About 40% is bound to proteins like albumin. About 48% is unbound in the ionic form. And about 10% is in sulfate or phosphate or citrate complexes. Calcium's critical in transmitting nerve signals, the contraction of muscles, the constriction of blood vessels, regulating blood pH. It's involved in signal transduction, which is how our cells respond to environmental stimuli. Calcium is really foundational in the body. And over the years on social media, when people have told me that they don't consume dairy because they don't feel well on it, I often have encouraged them to try different sources and find one that works for them, because it is such a unique form of nutrition, not only of calcium, but of potassium and magnesium and minerals. Especially milk or heavy cream is just really a powerhouse of nutrition. Those are the 2 things that I personally focus on. Heavy cream every day in my coffee, and then I'm very fortunate to be able to buy raw milk everywhere here in the state of Idaho. While we're on the topic of milk, there are many hormones involved in calcium regulation, and a lot of those hormones are found in cow's milk. So while cow's milk doesn't contain parathyroid hormone itself, cow's milk contains parathyroid hormone-related protein. It has calcitonin, it has staniocalcin, it has vitamin D, small amounts of estrogen in the form of 7-beta estradiol, as well as lesser amounts of estrone and 17-beta O-estradiol. There's also a relationship between calcium regulation and testosterone, as well as thyroid hormone. So you can see this long buildup before I'm even talking about calcification, because there's a lot of pieces interconnected. It's a huge picture and it's very complex. But my goal is to make this as simple to understand as possible. But we do need a lot of context here with this discussion about calcification. So this big player here is called parathyroid hormone. And like the name implies, that is a hormone secreted by our parathyroid glands. And those are pea-sized endocrine glands that are below our thyroid. And those regulate calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood. So going back to that 1% of calcium, it's really important to keep that stable. And when that so-called free calcium drops, parathyroid hormone is secreted to increase calcium in the blood by various different mechanisms, by stimulating kidney reabsorption of filtered calcium. It stimulates this process called resorption, not to be confused with reabsorption. So resorption is basically where the osteoclasts are stimulated, which are bone cells that break down bone tissue, which sounds like a disaster, but that is actually a normal process called bone remodeling. But when done in excess, for example, with chronic nutrient deficiencies, then that is a huge issue. So it releases calcium from broken down bone, called resorption, and parathyroid hormone, known as PTH, also increases calcium absorption in the intestine. So your body's not getting enough calcium, you're on a raw vegan diet, you're fruitarian, the body's very intelligent. It will use this hormone, PTH, to increase calcium in the blood and keep it in that really specific range for proper cellular function. The flip side of the coin to PTH is called calcitonin. That's a 32 amino acid peptide that's by the thyroid gland, and that inhibits bone resorption. So that slows the release of calcium from the bones. And that is released in response to elevated blood calcium, although its effect is weaker than parathyroid hormone. So I'm finally going to start tying this all together as it relates to soft tissue calcification. So bone remodeling that I mentioned earlier is the process where old bone tissue is replaced with new bone tissue. And within that process, calcification occurs, and it's a good thing because the bones in the teeth need ionized calcium to become crystallized via the process called normal calcification. Now, abnormal calcification is the focus of my CLF protocol. And if you've dabbled in human health, you've surely heard people talk about having a calcified pineal gland. Maybe you're talking to a non-player character and you're going too deep down the rabbit hole and they hit you with the fluoride stare. The insinuation there is that fluoride via oral consumption in drinking water calcifies the pineal gland. Of course, that's a very simplistic perspective. As I mentioned earlier, 99% of calcium is found in the bones and the teeth. So when it's found anywhere else besides the extracellular fluid, the blood, say it's in the pineal gland, well, fluoride has an affinity to calcium. It's called fluoroapatite. And that occurs when fluoride combines with the minerals calcium and phosphorus. And it makes the enamel of your teeth more resistant to acid attacks. That's why fluoride is used topically in toothpaste. I don't recommend drinking it, but personally, I brush my teeth with fluoride toothpaste. No, not Crest. I use a company called Saint, but there are other clean toothpastes that contain fluoride that are upgrades to what you would find from the conventional grocery store stuff. Another counter argument I'll use in defense of fluoride toothpaste is the Weston A. Price ancestral people talk about high cholesterol not being a root cause problem, but a response, a bodily response to inflammation. And cholesterol is just the ambulance at the scene. It doesn't mean that the ambulance caused the accident. I'm going to make the same argument exactly with fluoride as it relates to calcifying your pineal gland. Fluoride follows calcium. So it's the excess calcium that is the root cause issue of your pineal gland and the deficiencies in the things that regulate calcium and not the fluoride itself. So abnormal calcification is the process where soft tissues become calcified. They get an accumulation of calcium where it shouldn't be. And for that, you need a stimulus to crystallize the ionized calcium. And secondly, you need an excess of calcium and phosphate. And similar to calcium, most of the phosphate, 85% of it, is found in our bones. So you have calcium and phosphate ions. They come together, combine, forming calcium phosphate, mainly hydroxyapatite, which is the main component of our bone. And then that will deposit throughout the body in soft tissues. A big one is vascular calcification. That's when the excess calcium builds up and deposits within the blood vessels. And that is a root cause of conditions like kidney disease, diabetes, atherosclerosis. It also contributes to heart attack, stroke, and other heart problems. Easy way to think of it is we have a lot of highways throughout our body. We also have a lot of side streets and regular roads, arteries, veins. And when calcium builds up and we get abnormal calcification on those roads, whether it be big roads or small ones, or even capillaries, that is where we get issues, because without blood flow, we don't get oxygen to tissue. And without oxygen to tissue, we have cellular death. Here are a couple excerpts from my CLF article that I wrote. Vascular calcification is a strong predictor of coronary heart disease, stroke, and diabetes-related amputation. That's a study from Lehto, Lehto, from 1996. Here's another one. The earliest signs of non-palpable breast cancer are calcifications in the breast tissue. That's Mordang, Mordang, 2018. For the last several years, the health community has been going nuts about kidney stones. They scare people away from taking pure vitamin C, also called ascorbic acid, because it can form oxalate, even though they don't tell you that that's largely a genetic reaction when that occurs, combined with a magnesium and calcium deficiency. So the truth is that kidney stones are a result of kidney calcification. Yes, calcium deposits in the kidneys is what contributes to kidney stones. So if these social media influencers have scared you away from supplementing pure vitamin C, which is an amazing anti-stress agent and redox balancer, EMF protection supplement, then this podcast is for you. Because if you listen to what I'm talking about with the solutions for abnormal calcification, you will not have to worry about kidney stones. And I'll add, you also have to not be afraid of drinking water. So don't listen to the primal ancestral people that say we shouldn't be drinking plain water and all we need is fruit juice and milk, and even the crazy ones say blood. I would ignore all that nonsense. Be sure to drink plain water. If you feel great on it, drink enough water, and also keep your levels of the nutrients that I'm going to talk about up through supplementation. Of course, this is on top of a foundational nutritional program, basically eating real food, eating enough calories, not restricting any of the macronutrients. Now I'm going to get into the most actionable step of the whole podcast. And if you follow what I say here, you will decrease your risk of all of those diseases that I mentioned earlier that are linked with soft tissue calcification. Now, this is related to vitamin D, which has become a very heated topic over the last 4 or 5 years, largely because of COVID. Everybody was taking large doses, mega doses of vitamin D. You had the repeat people saying that unlimited amounts of vitamin D3 as cholecalciferol is completely safe with almost no risk, which doesn't really make sense. And then on the other side, you had the root cause protocol people saying that vitamin D is a poison, like I used to say, until I stopped demonizing any supplement. Without going too off track on each of those philosophies, there are foundational truths in each of them. Each camp has something useful for somebody, but both camps are wrong when they generalize that information to everybody. The past 2 years, after a lot of internet drama that I've been involved in, I've decided to drop as much fear as I possibly can, because the people spreading fear on social media, those accounts, they love the drama of it. They are addicted to that. And a lot of this is talking about the toxicity of supplements. So scaring people, like people have talked about my supplements, that they're going to cause harm, the extraction method, you're going to imbalance this or that, getting really super heady with it into the weeds, which is sometimes good. But if the goal is to help people, all that these internet trolls are doing are they are confusing people and taking them further away from optimal health. So a former guest that I had on the show, Caitlin Hardigan of the Iron Protocol, she's told me that vitamin D supplementation is D3 as cholecalciferol point blank saved her life. And I've heard this from various people, and she credits it to her genetics, that she needs to supplement vitamin D. And that's the case for a lot of people. And for them, they will get hypovitaminosis D or deficiency if they don't supplement. But people that don't need to supplement it, that megadose it, say for infection, can potentially get hypervitaminosis D or an excess of vitamin D. Now, circling back to that parathyroid hormone, that PTH, there's an intimate relationship with your vitamin D status. So when you go and you get blood work and you get a vitamin D test, what they're looking at is 25 OH vitamin D. And I've broken this down ad nauseum to the millionth degree on this podcast over the last 5 years. All of the extreme nuances that go into measuring your vitamin D and supplementing vitamin D. I do think it's the most overrated supplement there is. Personally, I put it way down on the list of priorities to supplement. And I keep bringing this up to podcast guests to see if I can grab some nuggets. My theory that certain people operate at a different reference range that's perhaps even lower than the recommended reference range for vitamin D. And I refer to serum ferritin as the same way, that some people could hover lower or hover higher with their iron levels. And that's just a theory, but I hover somewhere in the 30s of vitamin D every time that I've checked, and I don't have any of the vitamin D deficiency symptoms. Low testosterone, depression. I don't deal with vitamin D deficiency symptoms. So that's partially what birthed my theory that everybody has a different optimal level. But if you really want to dial it in, and I'm overdue for this test, I really have to get it done, is test your parathyroid hormone. And if parathyroid hormone is elevated, that is a sign that your body has a vitamin D imbalance. Because when it's below the ideal, that increases parathyroid hormone, and you'll start to pull calcium out of your bones. On the flip side, if parathyroid hormone is really low, that can indicate too much vitamin D, hypervitaminosis D, which could indicate soft tissue calcification. And remember that vitamin D increases calcium absorption. So if your vitamin D is sky high, you will have increased calcium absorption. And there's these relationships in the body between vitamins and minerals. And a lot of them aren't just a one-to-one. Most of them, in fact, a lot of them are one thing is connected to 5 things. So in the case of vitamin D is converted. So the supplement that you take, D3, cholecalciferol, is converted via magnesium to the form that they test when you go and get blood work done. And then it's converted once more with magnesium to 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, which is often called the biologically active form. And magnesium deficiency is very common. So how many people are actually converting their vitamin D properly? I know that back in 2012 when I became serious with supplementing magnesium in sufficient quantities. My entire life changed. At the same time, I was adding in shilajit and a lot of high quality dairy, raw goat milk, raw dairy in general. The combination of those things definitely increased my IQ, increased my creativity, my productivity, my energy level, my mood. My entire life got better with that combination. And it makes sense because I had the regulator of calcium called magnesium. Magnesium relaxes the muscles, calcium contracts. Magnesium and calcium have this dance in the cells. I had the ionized calcium, the high quality form of calcium, as well as cofactors coming in with the high quality dairy that I used to demonize as a vegan. And I had the shilajit with all of the trace minerals and the fulvic acid. I felt superhuman for the first time in my life. And looking back, it's amazing that I didn't have the vitamin E, the vitamin K2, the systemic enzymes, all of the things that I see now as daily requirements. Before we move on to other solutions besides magnesium, I want to stay with magnesium for a little bit. So magnesium could actually bind to phosphate. Remember earlier that I talked about the calcium phosphate crystals that are the component of calcification? Well, magnesium could actually bind to phosphate. So instead of it binding to calcium, it will bind to magnesium. And in doing so, it's actually counteracting calcification of all kinds, vascular calcification, coronary calcification. I found an interesting 2017 study from the journal Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology. And it talks about the different mechanisms whereby magnesium protects from soft tissue calcification. It talks about the process that I just described, but the really interesting one is it talks about this process called transdifferentiation. And it reads, magnesium supplementation effectively counteracts expression of osteogenic transcription factors, bone proteins, and genes associated with matrix mineralization, like osteocalcin and alkaline phosphatase. Simultaneously, it was observed that magnesium prevents the loss of calcification inhibitors, like DMP7, MGP, and osteopontin, that protect against osteogenic conversion. What does that mean in English? It means at a genetic level, magnesium protects from calcification, which is incredible. And if you dive into the research on magnesium versus calcification, it just goes on and on and on. Magnesium's incredible for preventing osteoporosis. Magnesium's incredible for the heart. That's one of the first supplements that I got into at the start of my health journey, and it absolutely changed my life. What I recommend as far as dosages for people is find a oral form that works for you, whether that's making your own liquid magnesium bicarbonate at home using magnesium hydroxide powder and cold carbonated filtered water, or easier than that and less work, although slightly more expensive, are magnesium pills. That's what I opt for. Magnesium glycinate and magnesium taurate are my favorite forms. So magnesium that's bound to the amino acids glycine and taurine, which each of those everybody could use. Those are incredibly healing amino acids. So I take minimum 300 milligrams of that a day, and sometimes a double dose 600 milligrams if I'm dealing with a lot of stress or traveling. Ignore the marketing of certain companies that are saying more forms the better. That is not true. I want a lot of the form that I feel good on. You don't need 7 different forms of microdose amounts of different magnesiums. Give me more glycine and taurine Because when you're supplementing, say, the magnesium Mag ATP product, you're not just getting the magnesium ion, although that's the star of the show. You're also getting a significant amount of glycine and taurine, which with each serving. The third way is topical magnesium, which is trendy. A lot of people know about the magnesium chloride sprays. But years ago, I started off with magnesium foot baths when I didn't have time or access to a bathtub. I just filled a copper vessel at my desk, or if I was reading a book, and I would just soak my feet in a bag of magnesium until the water became lukewarm. Now I'm fortunate to have a lodestone tub, natural magnetic tub that's grounded with magnetite. It's been struck by lightning, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So I pour minimum a whole bag of ancient minerals, magnesium chloride in there, 8 pounds. Sometimes I'll do 16 pounds if it's been a really long day. And also, again, until the water becomes lukewarm, because there's no use just getting in for 20 minutes and getting out. That's a complete waste of time. You want to stay in the bath long enough to really absorb it and get your money's worth. If you combine just 2 of those methods that I described, you will build your levels of magnesium, because most people are just not taking enough, and they're not going to surpass their magnesium burn rate, meaning the amount that you're burning through with oxidative stress, psychological stress. You have to supplement more than that to actually not just maintain, but to build your magnesium levels. So in that study, I mentioned MGP, and that stands for matrix GLA protein. And that's a very potent inhibitor of calcification. And it requires a nutrient, a vitamin called vitamin K. And it converts the inactive form, which is dephosphorylated, uncarboxylated MGP, which is basically just inactivated protein. And that one, when it's inactive, it actually increases calcification. But when it's activated by vitamin K2, it inhibits calcification. So that process of carboxylation is adding a carboxyl group to that MGP protein. And that process is vitamin K dependent. When matrix GLA protein's active, it binds to calcium ions and inhibits the formation of calcium crystals. What's interesting is matrix GLA protein is found not only in the blood vessels and the cartilage, but it's also found in the heart and kidneys. It's already there where your body needs it the most, just waiting to be activated by vitamin K2 as a vitamin K dependent protein. What's really interesting is that protein is the only known factor that not only inhibits, but also reverses the calcification process. And that is really what my CLF protocol is about. I don't just want to slow the accumulation of calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. I actually want to reverse them. And vitamin K2 is one of those major pieces of the puzzle. And if you don't like pills, you don't like swallowing capsules, and you still want vitamin K2, well, I recommend that you go on a aged cheese only diet, because to get to therapeutic supplement levels, you have to eat boatloads of aged cheese. Now, MK4, that form of vitamin K2, is fairly easy to get. You'll get that in a lot of different foods. Beef, liver, egg yolks, dairy, all contain vitamin K2 in the MK4 form. But when you dig into the clinical literature, the MK7 form has a much longer half-life, so it remains in the bloodstream longer. The protective effect from sticky blood, from excess blood coagulation, is greater and more long lasting with the long chain MK7 form of vitamin K2 instead of MK4. As the owner of a supplement company, MitoLife, I hang out in the supplement section of health food stores. And when I look at the vitamin K2 products on the market and the dose on the back of the bottle and the supplement facts, it's really laughable. It's barely anything. There are studies that looked at 500 micrograms of MK4 a day for 60 days, for 2 months, and showed no effect on the carboxylation of osteocalcin. Osteocalcin is another vitamin K dependent protein that's involved more with the bone forming process that maintains the structure of the bone and is required for bone remodeling. In the research, they had to go to 1,500 micrograms of MK4 a day to actually affect the carboxylation of osteocalcin. So essentially a megadose. And when I've looked at supplement bottles in the store, it's nowhere near 1,500 micrograms of MK4. It's usually a couple hundred micrograms, if that. This is part of why I'm so passionate to share health information as it relates to supplements. I find that most people are underdosing the right supplements and megadosing the wrong ones. So the vitamin K2 that I take and sell, it's called MitoLife Purely K, is 1,000 micrograms of vitamin K1 as phytomenadione. Then you have MK4 form, 2,000 micrograms, which is a significant amount. And then you have MK7 form that's sourced from a bacteria called Bacillus licheniformis, and that's 400 micrograms. And it's only one capsule a day. That's all you have to take, which comes out to about $1.67 every day, which when I was working 3 jobs, minimum wage, I could afford that. And if you catch sales, which that's what I do with every supplement that I buy, I wait for a sale and then I buy in bulk, then that price goes way down. And for the effects that you get for supplementing vitamin K2, not making medical claims here, but chronic conditions like diabetes, chronic kidney disease, stroke, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, things like left ventricular hypertrophy, really any problem with the heart, the aortic tissue, the coronary arteries, the myocardium, the heart valves. All of these are signs that it's time to look at vitamin K2. Look at the research, supplement it, get a sufficient amount of it. I use it preventatively. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. I don't want to have a stroke. I don't want to have kidney stones or heart disease or brain fog or all these neurodegenerative conditions of which calcification contributes. So I use supplementation preventatively. Magnesium and vitamin K2 are really the 2 most important supplements to focus on for calcification. And as I mentioned earlier, looking at that vitamin D relationship, whether it's too low or too high, I want to give honorable mentions to vitamin E and also Shilajit. There is a link between oxidative stress and increased calcification. So there are some studies that looked at vitamin E reducing oxidative stress, which then protects from calcification. Shilajit is often touted as a decalcifier in health circles. Whether that's true or not, what we know is that Shilajit strengthens the bones via improving the transfer of phosphate, magnesium, and calcium. And that can prevent the occurrence of osteoporosis and also calcification because it's managing those minerals. So personally, I take at least 1 capsule of vitamin E a day. That's the MitoLife PUFA Protect product. That's mixed tocopherol form of vitamin E. which also helps balance out polyunsaturated fatty acids in the body and protects from this lipofuscin piece, which I'll talk about in another episode. Shilajit, I take 1 gram a day. So I take 5 200 milligram compressed resin tablets. That's the product called Panacea from MitoLife. And that is imported from Russia. I have a third-party lab test with every batch that I release. A lot of people message me and say they only feel mine. They've tried other brands. There's something very special about the MitoLife Shilajit. So if you could only pick 2 and your focus is calcification, hit the magnesium and the vitamin K2. If you can, add in these other pieces that I mentioned, the vitamin E, the Shilajit. If you want to get crazy, add in systemic enzymes, which helps just reduce inflammation around the whole body because you're actually decreasing scar tissue, which increases blood flow, nutrient delivery, oxygen delivery, helps the body excrete waste. You can't go wrong with systemic enzymes. I hope this expanded your view on calcification because that word's thrown out quite a bit in the natural health community, in different health circles, mostly the detox and vegan community. But I wanted to bring it to a wider audience and highlight the importance of it. Heart issues are very common. Kidney issues are very common. What they have in common is soft tissue calcification. It's not only preventable, but it is reversible. So if you want to check out the products that I mentioned, it's mitolife.co. I founded this company. I have grounding sheets, shampoo, conditioner, a lot of great supplements on there, a really high quality shower filter that you can't find anywhere else. And then my website is matt-blackburn.com. You could read my CLF protocol on that website and also see all of my recommended products on there that I've found over the last 15 years. Check me out on Instagram. I post daily on my stories there. That's Matt Blackburn. Check out the MitoLife page on Instagram if you want to keep up to date with what's going on. And I will see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.